What makes the game, and perhaps any game in this genre or space, are the level designs, combat system, and the bosses. If any of those are lacking in some way, a lot of weight has to be picked up elsewhere. Let's get the easy one, level design, out of the way. There is nothing about the level design in this game that stands out in any real way. They keep you engaged, just enough that it doesn't take you out of the setting, but aside from that, you wouldn't write home about it. The way they are designed makes them very convenient. They are linear, so there isn't too much explorational freedom, however that results in a much more streamlined experience. I wouldn't get lost, routes would typically lead to some item or unique encounter, and most of the time, instead of backtracking, it will lead you right back to the initial fork in the road. But that's where the problem lies. When something is way too streamlined, and in this case, just convenient, you don't need to use your brain that much. I don't need to remember where I'm going, or pay attention to any of the details along the way. If I see something I can't reach at the moment, I don't try to figure out a way to get it. I know that eventually, it will lead me to that location in some way. By removing the difficulty and frustration that comes from getting lost, and needing to actually pay attention to where you go or trying to figure things out, you lose the engagement the player has with the level, and so the attachment and memorability doesn't exist. Getting into the combat system, I'll touch on how it works now, and then how it feels. Because, although in general, it is well done and engaging, I do have some gripes about how it plays out. Khazan gives you 3 weapon types, which are dual wield, greatsword, and spear. Each weapon has 4 or 5 skill trees you can go down, and an additional 3 or 4 trees that are not weapon specific. You get a variety of skills, passives, and small boosts here and there that makes the combat more enjoyable, as well as have different ways you can approach it. But the true variety, from my experience, came from the gear sets. There are a lot of gear sets with bonuses within the game, such as things that make you tankier, dealing more damage to certain enemy types, elemental damage, flat damage, stamina damage, and things like that. The gear sets determine how I will play the fights, and the skill trees typically complemented the gear sets. Here's where it gets interesting. The combat itself is fun because of the amount of options you have in tandem to your skills and gear sets that can have an effect on the options available to you. You get lights, heavies, skills, dodges, guards, just guards, counterattacks, and burst counters. So you have a ton of options to choose from. Like any typical game, you can be safe with a dodge or go for the guard to deal stamina damage, or if you have big ones, you try and do a counterattack. This keeps a lot of encounters fresh since there's a handful of ways to approach it, or at least that's how it should be. The game is fairly difficult, and with anything, when something is difficult, the amount of true freedom and creativity tend to get narrowed down to optimal, which leads us into the bosses. The bosses are, to me, the best part of the game. Each one seems to have some gimmick that makes them memorable, and the way the game introduces them to you is no joke. Early on, they pretty much tell you how you'll approach boss fights by just beating you down and forcing you to learn. Some of the early fights were way more difficult just because I didn't have a full grasp of the system yet. But that definitely doesn't mean the bosses later on were easy at all. And this is where I have a little asterisk when describing how it's supposed to work and how it actually plays. Despite the creativity and vast options there are, a lot of the boss fights felt as though I needed to play it perfectly. This, in and of itself, isn't too big of an issue, and in fact, it's one of the pride points of playing these types of games, that moment when you fully download the boss. The issue is, these fights are long, or at least they feel that way. Each attempt being anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes on average is a long time to try and stay focused. I found myself gravitated towards the spear, and the main aspect of the spear is stamina damage. The damage the spear does comes from the repeated bread and butter combos after breaking the stance and then cashing out on a burst attack. Meaning, in order for me to do pretty much any damage at all, I need to be in the pocket and just guard everything and do damage at any opening to keep attacking that stamina. Of course, I can play it much safer and much slower, but when you lose that slow attempt and realize 10 minutes have just gone down the drain, you just want to bite the bullet and play more aggressively. Which, in all honesty, leads to more attempts and ends up being just as long, if not longer, in total time. However, some fights have the bosses gain their stamina back, and if you don't constantly stay in the pocket, you'll never get that stance break. And so there are times where playing slow is just really toxic. The game is done well, and although it doesn't revolutionize anything within the genre, it doesn't need to. The game difficulty may deter some people as it is up there, however, you can change the difficulty if you want to. And there is also a pity system within the game where you can earn Lacrima, which is essentially the currency you use to level your character up. You can earn that even when you die. And the skill points you use to level up go down your skill tree is from combat. And you don't lose that on death either. So a lot of progress in the game can be made even if you keep dying on the same boss over and over and over again until you're no longer under level, or maybe you're even over level. There are a lot of systems in place to make your character stronger, tankier, heal more. So it's honestly not a bad entry into the genre. My main gripe within the game is that because a lot of the boss fights were challenging, and my means to defeat them required near perfect attempts, the freedom and options that the combat system technically has didn't feel present in those encounters. These type of games, or the genre, I think because of how streamlined it is, as well as the pity system and options to make the game easier, it's actually a good game to start your journey in.